Welcome, everybody, to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson and Nick Whalen here. We are brought to you by the good folks at Dabble, at Trophy Smack, and a new our partner here, Prosper Trading. Be sure to share more about them coming up soon here. Nick, it was a busy week 13. We're going to spin this like more looking forward than looking backward on today's podcast, though. So we're going to start right off with this upcoming Thursday's game. Two teams that played on Thanksgiving, Detroit and Dallas. Huge, massive game. Trying to stay alive in the playoff race. Neither team in right now. And that one was expected to be not in Dallas. They're the team that's on the upswing. Detroit's the team that is in danger here right now.
We are at a portion of the season, Jeff, where it feels like every week now we're going to have these essentially win or go home type of matchups all over the NFL. And they're involving teams, not like, for example, the Atlanta Falcons, where it's like, man, if they lose this game, they have no chance of even running the table. It's involving teams that we thought would be competing for the 1 seed, would be competing to lock up their divisions at this point in the season. And we're not quite there with Detroit as far as, the Lions losing this game and then, just crossing them off as a playoff team. But with the strength of the NFC right now, I don't even know that you could necessarily feel great about getting in as a wild card team with 10 wins. I think 11 wins might be the floor. And you look at the remaining schedule for the Detroit Lions, it doesn't get any easier after Thursday night. You got to go to the LA Rams out on the West Coast in week 15. So this is a huge, huge spot for a Lions team that it feels like the wheels are falling off. They have some big injuries, and yet they have not lost back-to-back games yet this season.
Yeah, exactly. They finished the season at Chicago for that matter too. And yeah, after week 2, you're like, oh yeah, that's a good game for them. Maybe not anymore. It's funny how things have turned. It could be the biggest contrast between start of the season and end of the season for these two teams. We'll see. And we have to start off all the injuries on Detroit. Amon-Ra St. Brown hasn't practiced this week. Didn't practice today. They still have some hope that he can play, but it's not looking great. Sam Laporta is out for the year. 3 offensive linemen are hurt, including one on Mahogany on IR. Frank Ragnow tried to come back, couldn't, failed his physical. He will not be walking through that door. Walking period seems like that might be hard for them with a grade 3 hamstring tear. Mm-hmm. Wild. He knew he had something with that hamstring, but to have that severe of an injury and just be running and things of that nature, just, it's crazy to me, but it just shows how tough some of these guys are and how they played through so much.
Well, it's also just emblematic of kind of how the season has devolved for the Lions, where you think, all right, we're help is arriving. Our former All-Pro, who's, still not even that old, right? It's not like this is like a 37-year-old guy coming out of retirement. It's like he's, in theory, still in his physical prime, coming back to help save the season. And then even that rug gets pulled out from under you on top of losing on Thanksgiving to Green Bay. But yeah, looking at this matchup against Dallas, I mean, we have what I believe is the highest total of the week. Yes, up to 54.5 now. Wow. At some books. 53.5 is the low number. Bengals Bills is really the only other game in that same level. That's at 52.5 right now at FanDuel. So in theory, this should be a spot where we see plenty of fantasy production. But like you said, Taylor Decker is questionable. Graham Glasgow is questionable, the starting center for Detroit. They're already without their starting left guard. So we could see, 2, maybe 3 regulars on that offensive line out. Their backup tight end to Sam Laporta, Brock Wright. To me, I don't expect him to play on Thursday. So you're down to some reserve options there. And if you don't have Amon-Ra St. Brown, it doesn't look like they're going to have Khalif Raymond. How high do you rank Jameson Williams this week?
I think I'm going to be around 10 or so. It's going to be really high. He's got the 3rd or 4th highest, yards prop for receivers right now, receiving yards prop. I'm doing my rankings today, and he's going to come in pretty high, which is pretty crazy considering at one point in time we're talking about, hey, maybe we won't, maybe I can't play him, but I can't cut him, but maybe I'd cut him just to see other people pick him up. Thank God I didn't do that, but I haven't been playing him either on a regular basis because as little as a couple of weeks ago, he did very little. It's just like, he had a bagel for me. In fact, I had the double bagel. I had Jordan Addison and Jameson Williams in the Scott Fish Bowl. And the week before that, he was huge. The week after that, he was huge. But, I had the bagel sandwich. There was a reverse bagel, I guess.
I know you said top 10. I think when you really go through and put together your rankings, it's going to be tough not to just keep bumping him up and up. Like I'm just looking at the slate overall right now. And it's like, how many guys would you say are like for sure locks to be ranked ahead of him? Like, are you ranking AJ Brown, for instance, ahead of Jameson Williams?
No, I don't know. It's been tough. I probably not. I probably, Oh, they play on Monday. I'll have more
night at the Chargers
against the Chargers, but probably not. Brown's close at least. He's one of those guys in the conversation. You look at yardage prop and you deal with that. Yeah. So yeah, but no, probably not. I'm just looking at.
It's Chase, it's Nakua, it's JSN. I think those guys are for sure ahead. Maybe there's even a case for Devontae Adams with the touchdown production. We'll see if Drake London is out there, but that's against Seattle with Kirk Cousins. Rashee Rice is a really interesting one, but that's going up against Houston.
And the two Dallas guys ahead and Devontae Adams ahead, although Adams has an injury of his own right there.
Yeah.
So something to pay attention to. I'm just looking at my rankings from last week. And yeah, after about 7 or 8, I'm just like, and this is a phenomenon all season. We've been talking about Jim Coventry and I do a tricky rankings podcast on Wednesdays. And receivers we just do receiver specials sometimes because after like 10 to 15 guys, any given week, there are guys that can just kill you. Zay Flowers killed you last week as an example. You look at Jalen Waddle, who had been going pretty good, barely did anything against the Saints. Rome Odunze is just all over the place. Jefferson's just killing you.
Well, that was one of the themes of the week, I think, is, not only guys who've been killing you, like Justin Jefferson, and, obviously Waddle has been kind of shaky week to week, but really for the most part, guys who have been very consistent and very good in fantasy this year just had a rough week 13 overall. Even the guys who still put together a solid week, like a CMC or a Jonathan Taylor. Christian McCaffrey had his second worst fantasy game of the year. Jonathan Taylor had one of his worst games of the year. Josh Allen was fine, but not a great game by any means. And then you had Smith-Njigba, Gibbs, Stafford, Jacobs, Saquon, Etienne, St. Brown, Abuka, Jefferson, Nakua, all of these guys having one of their 2 or 3 worst games of the year, if not outright their worst game in the case of someone like JSN.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could kind of see some of this coming on Sunday, at least. That the highest total, I think, was 45.5 going in, maybe 44.5. We anticipated being down, just not how it was down. The fact that, that Seattle built up that 16-0 lead before JSN had a touch in this game. You had the pick 6. That's the sort of thing that kills you in fantasy. When you see that there, Minnesota was actually down 3-0 at the time with 3 minutes left in the second quarter. So it's already going badly for us from a fantasy perspective when Brosmer threw that 4th down pick 6 and it turned a possible 7-3 Minnesota lead to 10-0 Seattle. And they could take their time after that. There was no desperation. Instead of Seattle having the ball deep in their own territory, just getting a plain stop and having the whole field to drive with. Instead, no, they're kicking off again. There's no points won for our fantasy players. It was a disaster from our perspective.
Yeah, my wife's fantasy team, she needed a big game out of JSN, and we're sitting there watching this, and she's like, why is he not doing more? I'm like, we need Minnesota to start doing something in order for Seattle to have the impetus to start throwing the ball offensively. It really was for as much of a beatdown and one-sided, just complete mismatch as that was. It really couldn't have been a whole lot worse from a fantasy perspective. Seattle didn't score a touchdown offensively until midway through the fourth quarter. They only finished with 219 yards of total offense. Buried in this, onslaught defensively was that Sam Darnold was not very good in this game at all. I thought he was just as bad as the beginning portions of the Rams game. So they ended up winning it defensively, but Darnold was sacked 4 times. He had a sack fumble. They only had one passing play that went for 20 plus yards.
Sneakily, he wasn't even that good against Tennessee.
No,
I think, and they lost their starting center, and I think that matters. I think that's part of the issue. But what are you going to do? It's tough. I think he does bounce back this week against Atlanta. Atlanta has allowed over the last 4 games over 1,100 passing yards, including the Bryce Young career game, one of the 4 best passing games of the season. In the last 4 games, they are the most passing yards allowed in that stretch there. So, yeah, I think this is a good week for Sam Darnold. The passing yards prop is 231.5, by the way. I would play the over on that one there. I think this is a get well week.
Behind only Tampa Bay in total passing yards allowed in that span. So I don't know if that means we jump on Tyler Shuck this week. I was telling you earlier today, you look at the passing yardage props, Tyler Shuck has a higher yardage prop than Baker Mayfield right now.
That's in a head-to-head matchup there. That's amazing. Quietly, the Saints defense is actually okay. And that's one of the other takeaways from that there. from that. We barely talked any New Orleans, Miami. So of course, let's make it a New Orleans, Miami podcast there. That'd be get all the views, all the listens there. But there were some interesting things going on in that game. And I guess we'll hit those up in a little bit, but I want to taking this back to the Detroit, Dallas. I think it's going to be tougher for Gibbs as well. Dallas's run defense quietly, it's been very good lately. I like the under on the Gibbs rushing prop. I believe is at 77.5 last I checked. With Quinn and Williams back, that's a completely different defense.
Yeah, totally different. And I've had to kind of wash out my priors on the Dallas defense over this last month because this is now like 3 really good games in a row. One of those was against the Raiders, so take that for what it's worth. But doing what they did to the Eagles in the second half, and then the Chiefs were still productive offensively. They were at 6 yards per play, which is still really good. 362 total yards. Patrick Mahomes, I thought, played about as well as he reasonably could. But we're seeing the Chiefs just make these very un-Chiefs-like mistakes every single week, just killer penalties, handing first downs to Dallas defensively. How many like 2nd and 20s were they in throughout the day? Like it's not Mahomes that's killing them. It's not the running game, which continues to be okay. It's just these lapses that you're not used to seeing from Kansas City. But Dallas is now good enough defensively to capitalize on those. And like you said, the run defense in particular has been completely transformed with Quinn and Williams. I'm just curious to the degree to which we see volume from Detroit, assuming that St. Brown isn't out there, and obviously no Sam Laporta. It's like, do you have to throw the ball 40 plus times offensively? Are you like, how long do they try to get the run going, I guess, against this Dallas defense?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's the real consideration here. I mean, think about the game flow too. If Dallas is able to move the ball against Detroit, and they get a lead early, and that's been happening because, hey, Dak's playing great. Detroit is attackable. We just saw Jordan Love throw 4 passing touchdowns against the Lions. Honestly, yeah, I think they may be in a pass mode, and you don't want to be one-dimensional. Dallas now can rush the passer. They are fundamentally a different team. Their DBs are still bad, but and that's why you have to try to get them, find a way to beat them. They'll give up those big plays on occasion still, but you have to have the time to get the ball off, and that's the thing that's going to be a tough consideration there.
They've also been a bad defense specifically against running backs as receivers. So I think, even if you're not traditionally running it well with Jahmyr Gibbs, you get him more involved as a pass catcher, get him more involved in the screen game. Like we've seen that kind of be, I wouldn't say a crutch for the Lions, but it's like, all right, when other things aren't working, we'll kind of zero in on that. He had 11 receptions a couple weeks ago in that Giants game where they needed to keep up. He had 10 catches in week 1 against Green Bay when they couldn't run the ball at all. So if you are looking for kind of an early week prop, I would look at the receptions total, the reception yardage for Jahmyr Gibbs. Cowboys are 28th in the NFL in yards per target allowed to running backs, and only I think 4 other teams have given up more receptions to running backs this season.
We're going to talk Chiefs Texans next because we did talk about the Chiefs a little bit there vis-a-vis the Cowboys. But first, quick note from our friends over at Dabble. Dabble isn't just another DFS app. It's the ultimate social platform where you can connect with other fantasy sports lovers. Dabble lets you win big. You can win up to 5,000 times your money this football season. Starting with Dabble is easy. New users get $25 free when signing up. No deposit necessary. Check out the link in the episode description below to download Dabble now. Big thanks to Dabble for their sponsorship of the RotoWire podcast. Kansas City Chiefs host the Houston Texans in what is also a playoff elimination game, at least for the Chiefs and kind of for the Texans too, although the Texans do have a different path there at the AFC South at least. They're only 1 game out now and have 2 wins over the they've 2 no, they split the games against the Jags, right?
They split with the Jags. They swept the Titans, and they won
up on the
Colts last week.
Yeah, so they're still in good position for the division, especially if they win the comeback game against the Colts. Jags and Titans. Jags and Colts play later. Also, we'll talk about that later. But Texans, they're on a roll. They smoked the Bills 2 weeks ago. They beat the Colts in Indy. Didn't smoke them, but that was a good game. Lot going on in this team here. So let's start off on the Texans side of things here.
Yeah, I think, Houston is kind of rolling to a degree that really no other team is right now defensively, at least. Obviously you have Denver's won a ton of games in a row. New England's won a ton of games in a row. But we've kind of come to expect that from those teams. They've been doing it for 2.5 months, whereas Houston, to me, still kind of looked dead in the water like 1 month ago. And now they've won 4 in a row. They got their quarterback back. And, there's still, I think, some meat on the bone for them offensively. They're still winning with defense. That was the case against Tennessee. That was the case against Buffalo. That was, of course, the case against Indy this past week. But we are starting to see that passing game open up a little bit more, especially compared to early in the season when it felt like it was a miracle if they got to 20 points. But Nico Collins looking like Nico Collins, making big plays every week. He goes 5 for 98 in that win over the Colts, and then having reliable second options behind him. I think that was the big issue for them at the start of the year, was teams could just kind of key on Nico Collins and force this group of either young players or no-name guys to beat them. Jaden Higgins being a dude, I think, has mattered for them. Dalton Schultz has had a really nice last month and a half. Like every now and then you'll get a Xavier Hutchinson appearance. Christian Kirk has made a few plays for them. Coming into the year, I kind of thought this was like one of the worst wide receiver groups in the NFL, but the emergence of Higgins specifically has given them a really nice number 2.
It really has. And, every once in a while, Kirk gets in the way. Xavier Hutchinson, like you said, had a big one. In the very first drive, he had a good big catch there. But you're right. For the most part, Higgins is really starting to emerge, and I'm here for it there. He's a good player. Noel has kind of fallen out of the offensive rotation. I expect to see more out of him. And Dalton Schultz, every week gets like 7 or 8 targets as well. Schultz was big early in that game, had a number of first downs early on, didn't do as much late. They still can't run very effectively in short yardage situations. There was that 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 sequence there. They did the Cade Stover runs.
Yeah.
Let's stop with that nonsense. Let's get rid of that. That's just not working. It's like this new trend is to do the tight end tight end tush push there. Let's get away with that.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of close the book on the Texans side of things, Dalton Schultz is your tight end 5 since week 7. So that's a pretty hefty sample at this point. I mean, he's certainly not shown the Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, George Kittle, even Travis Kelce upside. Like all those guys have multiple 20-plus point games in that span, whereas Schultz has no more than 18.8. But the floor has been there for the most part, with the exception of week 12. So he's nowhere near that top tier, but he has become almost like the Jacoby Brissett of tight ends, just like a very acceptable starter, a guy you could count on to not have the floor fall out.
Yeah, exactly. I'll say one other comment. Uncle Ted alluded to it in the chat that CJ Stroud does still turn the ball over. He threw a bad interception right after the Tyler Warren tush push fail fumble that kept the Colts in this game in a way. That would be something that I watched for a little bit. I also watched to see Woody Marks' status this week. He left that game with an ankle. Came back in the second quarter, but kind of sometimes the day after, 2 days after, you sometimes see these ankle injuries crop back up as something that are a real issue. I wouldn't be surprised if he misses some practice this week. Let's talk about the Chiefs side. 3 offensive linemen hurt against this great pass rush. Seems like a bad formula to me.
It does. And, normally in years past in a game like this, I would just default to, well, it's the Chiefs. They'll figure it out. They'll convert when they need to. I that faith is just dwindling, man. I know Andy Reid says, all right, we're going to, we'll have to dig into our bag of tricks. We'll have to get more creative offensively. That all sounds great, but like this is like the last team that you want to play right now. If you're the Chiefs, right? If you are like, all right, we absolutely need to win this game. What defense do I not want to go up against? I think it's Houston, especially with those injuries on the offensive line. I think at least 2 of those guys, if not all 3, aren't going to be out there. Protection's already been an issue. Mahomes is having to make miracle plays. It feels like every series just to convert 3rd downs. Like talent-wise, I think the Chiefs should be doing more, right? I mean, I think Rashee Rice has, for the most part, gotten his numbers. Still feels like there's a play or 2 every week where you're like, yeah, probably should have brought that in, or that probably should have been a bigger play. I think Kelce, for the most part, at his age, has given you a pretty nice season, but the lack of Xavier Worthy pop every week is really something that I noticed with Kansas City. And then I say this on the show every week, but the lack of explosion in the running game, there's just no upside there. I know they're effective down to down, but not being able to generate chunk plays on the ground, I think really hurts them.
Yeah, I agree. Pacheco got 3 carries in this game. Why?
They love Kareem Hunt.
Why? I
don't know.
They just love themselves them Kareem Hunt there. And it just bothers me. Worthy has been getting more involved in general plays. Had a big play against Dallas, that 42-yarder. I think that was the Mahomes weird scramble play. Yeah. But he's playing more snaps, period. That happened the week before as well. But yeah, when they beat the Colts, he was getting more involved. Had some pretty big plays in that. But I just don't understand. I get it's Pacheco's first game back. Maybe they had something to do with it there, but just remind me, never rank Pacheco ahead of Hunt because the Chiefs don't.
No, and I'd like to see a little more Pacheco because he is more explosive than Kareem Hunt, but he's still not super explosive, right? I'm not saying everybody can have a Jahmyr Gibbs on their team, but again, for the most part, like the success rate numbers, the EPA numbers say the Chiefs are running the ball really well. It doesn't pass the eye test to me. I know in that Indy game, they picked up 1 million first downs, but they feel so stuck in the mud. All the easy things look difficult for Kansas City. And again, I won't be surprised if the Chiefs come out and win this game just because they are backed into the corner of all corners and you still have the best quarterback in football, in my opinion. But I will be very surprised if they win this game handily because really nobody does that against this Houston defense.
Indeed. Other big game this week, Indy-Jacksonville. This is AFC South week apparently because this is, and hey, we got 3 viable teams and then the Titans over there eating pace. So, let's talk about the Colts and the Titans. Colts are on a struggle right now. No getting around it. They've lost 3 out of 4. They've played good teams in this stretch. Yeah. They at Pittsburgh, that maybe a decent team, average team at least. Beat Atlanta and Berlin, lost at Kansas City, and then lost at home to Houston there. But they have a really nasty schedule the rest of the way too. Bad time for them to be playing their worst offensive football.
Yeah, you said it. 2 worst offensive games of the year now in back-to-back weeks, just in terms of total yardage. 255 against KC, 281 this week. Bottling up Jonathan Taylor is where that starts. And over the last 2 games, he has 37 carries for 143 yards, no touchdowns. That's still not even that bad. It feels like it's been worse. Like on a yards per carry basis, he's still doing okay. But the bar is just so high for Jonathan Taylor. This is the guy who had a 244-yard game a few weeks ago, 12 for 153 a couple weeks before that. So just, really preventing him from ripping off the big game-changing play that it felt like he had every single week through the first 10 games. And then the other thing, Jeff, is, one, that the defense is struggling to get off the field, but I don't really think that's the main issue. The offense is not converting 3rd and 4th downs at nearly the same rate as it's been for most of the season.
Right.
We talked last week about ending that KC game with 4 straight 3-and-outs. They started with 2 consecutive 3-and-outs this past week against Houston, and they're just getting crushed in terms of total plays run, in terms of time of possession. Last week against KC, they lose time of possession 43 minutes to 25 minutes. That was an overtime game. This week, they lose time of possession 35 minutes to 25 minutes. They are minus 61 in total plays run over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. And as the chat is suggesting, Daniel Jones's health is a big issue of this year. Playing with the fractured fibula. I think that's a big aspect of it there. We alluded to the play of the Tyler Warren 4th down tush push play. That was normally a play where Jones is under center. They have a multitude of options. They don't have that on 4th down right now. They don't have him doing the RPOs nearly as much, which also takes away from the holes that Jonathan Taylor sees. It's a big spillover effect. It kind of ticks into everything that they do, taking away Jones's mobility. If you make him a standard, pocket passer, well, he's not a great pocket passer.
Yeah,
he's just not that guy. And you make him, 2-dimensional. You make this team 2-dimensional. It takes away a lot of what they do. And I think, unfortunately, I don't see I don't see the rest of this season him being a whole lot different. It takes the offseason to make this better.
I mean, playing through a fractured fibula is just crazy in general. I mean, obviously it's not severe enough that it's completely hampering him, but they're going to have to be really careful with this if he's going to keep playing every week. Conceivably, that's not going to heal on the fly, I don't think. So it's not just something to worry about this week, but really the rest of the way. And nobody's going to confuse Daniel Jones with Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. But there were 2 or 3 plays every week early in the season where he would, either run in a touchdown, sneak on 4th down, pick up a 3rd down with his legs,
scrambling. Yeah,
I think of that Atlanta game, right, where he wasn't it was 3rd and 19 or something like that, and he had an 18-yard run on 3rd down.
Right.
That's just not happening anymore. That's not a possibility.
Yeah, 1 carry in that Houston game. 1.
Yeah.
That matters a ton. You take that element away, and then your defense can play you differently. It affects everybody involved. It definitely affects Taylor. Taylor got 21 carries, so he got plenty of opportunities. This wasn't like the Chiefs game.
Yeah.
He got, he had 3 catches, 5 targets. Maybe you want to see one more, but my God, we're talking about 24 touches and 26 opportunities for a touch. That should be enough. Tyler Warren, is not finding as many openings in the middle now. He did get that 1 touchdown. And every week it's either Pierce or Pittman that gets hurt. Last week it was Pittman. 2 weeks ago it was Pierce who had 2 targets against the Chiefs. At least they got Pierce more involved in this game, but still, he was getting 7 or 8 targets. He got 5. Now he did a lot with them, 478 in the touchdown. Such a good player. They do need to keep getting him involved.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see, could Jacksonville be the latest team now to slow down the Colts? Because we've kind of seen the recipe for it. Jacksonville's playing really well defensively right now. The offense still is the Jags offense. I think you look at that final score against Tennessee and you assume that, it's just a total beatdown. The Jags only had like 270 yards of offense. They were under 5 yards per play. They had 13 penalties, which is a huge issue. Every single week, the Jags are just racking up penalties, illegal formations, plays are being called back. That's going to hurt them at some point. There was a point in the first half of this game where there were 6 consecutive 3-and-outs between the Jags and the Titans. So Jacksonville's playing well right now. They're not exactly rolling offensively. I do think the addition of Jacoby Myers has been big, just having somebody who can reliably catch the ball, getting Brenton Strange back. He had a touchdown on Sunday. Like that's maybe even the more impactful one. But this will be on the defense. This has been a top 10 defense by EPA, by success rate this season. Jags have 12 sacks in the last 3 games. They had the fewest sacks in the NFL through 10 weeks. So something has flipped there. Josh Hines-Allen is starting to play a lot better. But this is a big jump up in competition. It's one thing to squeak out a crazy win over the Cardinals and then beat the lowly Titans. This is the biggest game in a while for the Jags.
Yeah, Jags had the initial touchdown to go up 7-3. Subsequent fumble on the kickoff by DK, and that only took a review to turn that over. They got the 2-point conversion after that too, because of course the Titans committed a penalty. And then the Titans right before half, last play of the half, they just let Trevor Lawrence run out of bounds. The half is over, and instead, no, there's a late hit and unnecessary roughness. 15 more yards, enough to put Cam Little in a field goal range, actual field goal range, not just little field goal range, which, he makes a field goal. It's a free 3 points. Now, maybe that was already done for at that point in time, considering Tennessee scored 3 points. But at the same time, that's just gifting points. They didn't have to get yards, these long drives. The running game wasn't even as effective as it was, say, against the Chargers earlier. It was a really bad game for ETN. Nice, another Tootin touchdown. He's been getting goal line carries. It's not that ETN doesn't get them. In fact, I think he may have had the play before, but just not all of them.
The Jags had a full quarter of garbage time where they had 3 real possessions and when 6 plays, -1 yard, 3 plays, -5 yards, 3 plays, 2 yards. They literally had negative yards on 4 drives total in the fourth quarter. So they're, that would kind of be the opportunity where if you can move the chains a couple of times, you can, put together some longer drives, you can pad those running stats. And even at that point in the game, they couldn't do it. But it's kind of gone every other week, right? Like I wouldn't have come into that Chargers game with the way the Jags were playing. They were coming off of that, ridiculous loss to Houston. And, ETN just kind of hits the ground running. Same thing against Arizona. He had like 15 fantasy points in the first quarter. This should be a much better matchup, you would think, against Tennessee. And, it turned out they leaned a little bit more heavily on Lawrence and that defense. So I still have trust issues with the Jags offense. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think adding Jacoby Myers was a nice stroke, though. I think that helped. Yeah. You can tell Lawrence has that trust in him already. We saw Brian Thomas Jr. go over the middle a couple of times. I had to say, it wasn't just fly patterns. It wasn't just cardio. So that was good to see. But Myers is definitely in that circle of trust. Brenton Strange being back is huge. I think that helps change that offense. Parker Washington got hurt. It's going to be something to watch for us.
I don't think he's going to play, by the way. Which, there's, maybe we see a little more Tim Patrick. You see a little more Austin Trammell is, one of their kind of depth pieces. De'Ami Brown, by the way, was scratched. He was just inactive against Tennessee this past week. So maybe he's back in the mix. But, if I have, and I actually do have this in a league, if I have Jacoby Myers and Brian Thomas on a team right now, I would start Myers over Thomas.
In fact, my rankings last week went Myers, Washington, Thomas in that order. I wanted to see how they used Thomas in his first game back. It is. I still had to use him in a couple of leagues, and I will this week for sure. But yeah, it is a tough scene for sure. All right, we're going to move on. We'll talk about a couple other the noteworthy games coming up this week. But first, quick note from our friends over at Trophy Smack. You dominated your fantasy football league all season long. Now it's time to show it off. Trophy Smack turns your league domination into hardware built to flex. From championship belts, trophies, rings, and chains, they've got everything a true champion needs to make victories unforgettable. And don't forget about shaming that league loser. They've got items like high visibility loser vests, embarrassing singlets, and humiliating license plate frames. Trophy Smack fuels the glory and the punishment every league needs to keep the season unforgettable. Trash talk fades, but hardware lasts forever. You earn this moment. Claim it. Visit TrophySmack.com to lock in your hardware and take 10% off with code RotoSmack10. That's TrophySmack.com, code RotoSmack10. You can thank us later. Well, thank you now. Thank you, Trophy Smack. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Nick, I want to talk about a game that is not high on the priority list because it affects our fantasy leagues greatly, and that's Washington, Minnesota. How many receivers will you start over Justin Jefferson this week?
I don't have an exact number for you. The number is a lot, that's for sure. The one thing I will say is, one, it looks like McCarthy's going to be back, which I can't believe we have to frame it this way, but thank goodness, because, I was on the show last week saying there's no way it could be worse. I'm actually curious to see what Max Brosmer gives them. You can't play worse than McCarthy did against Green Bay. And that was wrong. That was wrong. Brosmer was somehow worse. The QBR numbers were similar. The EPA numbers were similar, but it was worse for Brosmer. Now, I will say you have a much better matchup here, right? Like Green Bay and Seattle back-to-back weeks is about as brutal as it gets. Both of those games, being on the road. At least now you're home against Washington. I know the Commanders played a pretty nice game, a really compelling game on Sunday night against Denver. But basically everybody plays the Broncos close at this point. They find ways to win these games, but I'm not surprised at all that Washington was able to hang around. I think the question is, do we view Washington's defense any differently now that they're slightly healthier? They got Deron Payne back. Dan Quinn is apparently taken over as the coordinator. Again, if you have Justin Jefferson and you're likely in like a win and in scenario, as many people are this week, it's going to be really, really hard to bench him. But what is the upside, right? Like, what is even like a best case scenario game for Justin Jefferson now? Like 16 fantasy points?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're hoping he scores once, and that cures it. You're just not going to get that dominant game. So it's, we thought that Justin Jefferson was quarterback proof. We may have even used that line. I may have, at least, because let's face it, he did it with some really sorry quarterbacks in the past. Nick Mullins, he had big games with, it just some really bad quarterbacks. And yet this somehow has been exceeded expectations for how bad it could get.
I think maybe we didn't properly realize that those guys aren't good quarterbacks, but they're not terrible quarterbacks. Like I would absolutely love for the Vikings to have Nick Mullins available to start this week.
He'd chuck it at least.
Right. It's like, I mean, there are almost any other depth chart of quarterbacks around the NFL you would take over this current situation. And again, like better matchup, McCarthy's at least more experienced. That was just such a brutal spot for Brosmer to have to make his first start. It probably won't be as bad as it's been the last 2 weeks, but who knows? I mean, it almost feels like defenses now are like well aware of the situation, and they're like, Seattle wanted to embarrass Brosmer, wanted to embarrass Minnesota in that game. I don't know if Washington is capable of doing that, but it totally changes your defensive approach, right? You could just be as aggressive as you want because you're not worried about the quarterback beating you. With that said, we're also not that far removed from Minnesota winning against Detroit like 3 weeks ago, right? So like there's at least a slightly higher floor, we think, with McCarthy. Where I have Jefferson, I'm still going to start him unless I have just a great alternative. I think we have to go more to like an either or type of question. Like, would you start this guy or Jefferson instead of like, how many quantity of receivers are ahead of him?
Okay. Jacoby Myers versus Justin Jefferson.
Damn. That is actually a really tough question. I think I would go Myers.
I think so too. How about his teammate Brian Thomas Jr. versus Justin Jefferson?
Jefferson.
Okay, that's trolling at that point in time. Yeah. But that's the point though. It's somewhere in the 30s is probably where I'm going to end up with Jefferson. And lower on Addison, obviously too. I will say Washington's defense presents an opportunity, and it's Washington's defense at Minnesota too. Keep that in mind. Location matters, I think, with these quarterbacks a little bit. On the flip side, Washington, they, Mariota, or however Mariota on Sunday night. God, that was it's just so disconcerting to hear it. Not disconcerting. That's not the word. I'm like, just off-putting. It might not be wrong, but it threw me off the entire time. And the repeated emphasis without explanation was crazy. But is it going to be him or is it going to be Jaden Daniels this week? Daniels had limited practice last week. Was not cleared for contact yet there's still a chance that he plays this week. We'll see on that there. I know Tyler has been begging to hear about Jaden Daniels. So we're talking about him now, but not quite sure. We don't know yet until practice. We probably won't know until Friday who's the quarterback there. Does that matter if you have Terry McLaurin?
To some degree. I mean, I think you'd still rather it be Jaden Daniels at this point, but I mean, Marcus Mariota played an incredible game, I thought, against Denver. Just doing things that I didn't think Marcus Mariota was capable of. A couple nice deep balls late in the game, some threaded throws in huge spots to Zach Ertz over the middle to keep drives alive. And then, of course, somehow not being sacked twice on that last fourth down to end up keeping the final drive alive. So either way, I think you're in okay shape here. I thought McLaurin looked really good. He was somebody that I would have been a little skittish about throwing out there. It was a long absence. He's been in and out all year. Not a great situation, of course, going up against Denver. And then he gets 14 targets in what ended up being a much higher volume game than we expected. But Minnesota's a good defense. I think Washington is still going to have to throw the ball with volume here. I don't know that they'll have as much success on the ground as Green Bay did a couple of weeks ago. Seattle, though, did struggle to throw on Minnesota last week. So there are kind of a lot of conflicting things here. To answer the overall question on Jaden Daniels, Tyler, I hope you're listening here in the chat. Like you said, we don't know. I think he plays if he is cleared. I don't think they will hold him out. They were talking about that during the broadcast on Sunday night. And I think what we're seeing with Joe Burrow kind of paves the way for a similar thing, where even if deep down your season is over, he's a competitor. He wants to show up for his teammates. If he's healthy, he's going to be out there.
Yeah, I just don't know what version of Daniels we get either. Is there going to be some restrictions on his ability to scramble?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's a lot of uncertainty, and again, at Minnesota isn't like this walk in the park either. That's the other thing that's going to be tricky is we saw it with Sam Darnold. That's a tough matchup, and so that's also a tricky aspect of this here. All right, that's enough Minnesota, Washington that anybody could handle at this point in the week, especially. We're going to take do one more read, and then we'll move on to talk a little Chicago, Green Bay, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cincy, Buffalo. Our next sponsor is Prosper Trading. Every weekend, millions bet on sports, hoping to beat the odds. But here's the truth. The house always wins. With trading, you're not betting, you're building. At Prosper Trading Academy, we give you the tools, the education, and the live guidance to actually create an edge. You can control your risk, compound your wins, and trade alongside real pros every single day. Stop gambling on games you can't control. Start trading the markets you can. Visit prospertrading.com/roto today. That's prospertrading.com/ROTO and take your shot at real financial growth. Thanks to Prosper Trading for joining the RotoWire podcast. Chicago, Green Bay. Maybe the biggest showdown on the slate here. Not an elimination game by any stretch, but huge for determining who wins the NFC North. Huge. And they get two of these games coming up, and huge for just who might be at the top of the NFC when we come to the playoffs. Yeah, I think kind of a dangerous game for Green Bay, right? Where on one side, you now have the chance to be the team that finally exposes this fraudulent Chicago Bears team that's been skating by every single week, playing backup quarterbacks and bad defenses. But then all of a sudden they get this convincing win over Philly on the road, and then doing it like they did, right? Just pounding the ball all over what's been a really good run defense. I think this makes this an even more intriguing game. Obviously, Green Bay, their stock is back up after that win over Detroit, decimating Minnesota the week before. Packers are 6.5-point favorites. I know they're at home. That they're certainly the better team. They have the quarterback who I trust more. 6.5 does feel like a lot for how the Bears are playing right now. And you look at some of the injuries defensively for Green Bay. They won on Thanksgiving, but they lost Devontae Wyatt. That's going to be huge the rest of the way. It doesn't sound like Lucas Van Ness is going to play this week. Their other interior defensive tackle, Carl Brooks, is banged up. I mean, you could be without 3 of your top 5 or 6 on that defensive line. And if I'm Chicago, I'm trying to win the same way I did last week, right? I think you test that Green Bay run defense without Devontae Wyatt and see how it holds up. Maybe you're not going to get 40 carries out of Monungai and DeAndre Swift, but I think the Bears, we've talked a lot about this team. We haven't talked about their offensive line much this season. I mean, what an improved unit that's been.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you could just see it the way they took it to Philly there. I mean, you just don't see that. You don't see, Jalen Carter getting pushed around. Yeah. That's the thing that, the Philly defense until like the second half of the Dallas game looked like just this impenetrable fortress all of a sudden. Dallas moves the ball on them, and Chicago moves the ball on the opening drive. They moved it, got stopped on a 4th down. No problem. Come right back down the field. Couldn't throw the ball super effectively. Didn't have really any good downfield passing. It was a tough day if you have Roma Dunze. But man, that running game was fun. They were just Monangai run. Kyle Monangai is from the Isaiah Pacheco school of run hard. He's fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising to us that they built this two-headed monster backfield, right? Yep. Because that's kind of what Ben Johnson came from in Detroit. It's not nearly at the same level of a Gibbs Montgomery, but they're making it work. And I think he's kind of built that same type of attack. Now, he doesn't have the efficient quarterback play. That's the thing. No. It's like Caleb Williams every single week kind of feels like he plays the same game where there's a couple impressive throws. He does a good job extending plays. He uses his legs here and there. And then you look at the end and it's like, oh, he was 17 of 36 or 15 of 34. Still too many misses down the field. And I think if you're Green Bay, you're trying to force the ball into Caleb's hands as much as possible, even if that leads to a couple of explosives here and there, which Ben Johnson has done a good job of scheming up. But you just can't get pushed around defensively like the Eagles were. 281 rushing yards in this game for Chicago. And it started early on, even that first drive of the game where they went out on 4th down, which ended up being reviewed, controversial spot, whatever. I mean, that was an 11-play drive. They started with an 11-play drive, another 11-play drive, and a 15-play drive to salt away half of the first half.
And meanwhile, Philly is either touchdown or 3 and out. And so those 3 and outs are just killing them too. Giving the ball right.
Philly was horrible in this game. Everybody was bad. Like nobody played a good game except for AJ Brown.
Yep. Agreed with that. Tush push fumble. There was a bad pick by Hurts at a bad time there. Just awful all the way around there. Very surprising result there. I actually thought that was going to be the can't get away with it game for the Bears. And instead, no, they got away with it again. In fact, they didn't just get away with it. They earned that win. That one was like not a get away with it game.
I know. And it's terrible because it ruins all of my Bears or fraud takes. It's like, there's nothing you could point to here and say, no, Jalen Hurts got injured. Like, no, it was just a straight up whooping by the Chicago Bears. And look, I mean, Philly contributed to this by playing so badly offensively against what should be an exploitable defense, but still, I mean, I think Green Bay will come out better on offense. But they also just played close to a best case game. I think, with all the 3rd and 4th down conversions last week. Like if I'm the Bears, I'm going into this game with a pretty high degree of confidence, to be honest. I think they proved something to themselves against Philly.
Yeah. I'll let you hold on to your Caleb hater card though. Still, he that one we're not going to take away from you just yet. Not that you're a hater, but you know what I'm saying. Caleb skeptic card. And we'll see about him because he's not the reason they won. That's still another issue there. All right, let's talk Lamar. So I'm a Bengals fan, a self-hating Bengals fan. I thought Baltimore was going to murder, death, kill the Bengals because I thought this was the get right game for Lamar, for Mark Andrews, for Derrick Henry. And after one drive, I thought I was right. They marched down, they scored the touchdown. It's looking like, okay, yeah, it's fun having Burrow back. They're going to move the ball at least, but that defense is still the worst defense of all time. And a funny thing happened. Bengals defense either played well or Lamar played terribly or both.
I thought Lamar was very bad, very, very bad throughout this game. I thought he looked healthier than he had in recent weeks. There were a couple scrambles, kind of getting out of the pocket where he looked faster to me. But I thought the accuracy was awful, which really for the most part has not been an issue with him over the last few years. I thought the decision-making was bad. Not only missing throws, but then you see the replay and it's like, oh, he's trying to thread something into Isaiah Likely. And, Mark Andrews was wide open on the other side of the field. There were just way too many of those. The play calling for Baltimore was horrendous.
Yes.
We saw a lot of Rasheen Ali. We did not see very much of Derrick Henry, who had a big touchdown run early in the game. There was a point in the first half where Baltimore is struggling. They're turning it over. They're not doing anything on offense. There was an 18-play stretch where Derrick Henry carried the ball one time. Like, I just don't understand what Baltimore was thinking. They were never trailing by enough where you have to go into, full-on throw mode. Their reliance on the pass just ended up leading to more turnovers. Of course, there were some fluky plays, likely fumbling on his way into the end zone, that, brutal call on a push-off for Zay Flowers. Like, Baltimore probably should have won this game, but at the same time had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, even despite those errors, to still win this game against the worst defense in NFL history. And they scored 14 points at home.
Yeah. I even thought, okay, Keaton Mitchell scores to make it 19-14. Okay, they're back. This okay, hang on to your butts.
Right.
As a Bengals fan, I'm like, here we go. And no, Burrow hits the Yosevach, just beautiful seed of a throw on the seam pattern there, puts it back up to 2-touchdown lead or two score lead. And Baltimore was done after that point in time. Just no resiliency at all after that. I thought they should have run Keaton Mitchell a hell of a lot more. You saw what he could do on an outside run on the touchdown. He got 2 carries in this game. The Bengals cannot deal with that outside run, and they just didn't use it. I agree. Horrible play calling in this game. Just abysmal play calling in this game.
It was a total panic job, I thought, by the Ravens. And they've had a few of those, not only this season, but in years past. And it's just when things aren't going their way, I don't trust this team to adjust on the fly. I don't trust the quarterback. I far from trust the coaching staff at this point. I think they've been one of the worst coach teams in the NFL all season long. And there was just, again, they had so many possessions throughout this game and chances to get back in. I mean, Cincinnati's kicking all these field goals. They're just begging the Ravens to take this game. And it was an outright refusal. I mean, at one point, Jeff, after that opening drive touchdown, it's 7-3. 3 plays, fumble, 3 and out, punt, 7 plays, fumble, 5 and out, punt, 1 play, immediate fumble, end of half, and then they come out with a 3 and out, getting the ball to start the third quarter. Like there was just like 2 straight hours of incompetent football by the Ravens.
That's amazing to watch. Just amazing. Even late in the game. Okay, we're starting to drive again. Nope, we get the tipped interception. That just ended the game there, right then and there. Bengals tried to, P. Ryan fumbles to try to keep Baltimore in the game.
Yeah.
Nope, do not want. Zay Flowers fumbles after that there. It just refusal to take the game. You heard the unease in the Baltimore fan base there. There was some booing going on at the end of that game too. It wasn't as acute as it was for their upcoming opponent, the Steelers, where it's on full-on dumpster fire mode right now.
Yeah, it sets up a really, really interesting game where it's like both teams fans like hate their current team. I think Ravens fans recognize that, I guess we'll probably still win the division, but nobody's talking Super Bowl right now in Baltimore. And in Pittsburgh, it's gotten to the point where your quarterback is openly calling out everybody on his team. Your head coach is saying, yes, I understand why people are calling for my head. Fans are chanting fire Tomlin at a home game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like this
even Tomlin's like, yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, right. I mean, this is bad, man. This is really bad. The Steelers have gone 5 straight games without completing a single pass of more than 20 yards. They're 0 for 13 on those with 3 interceptions. Like there's just no explosion whatsoever. Like their only path to winning games right now is 1, playing the Cincinnati Bengals, or 2, forcing like 4 fluky turnovers through the course of a game because they have nothing on offense.
Right. Exactly. It's such a tough watch right now. Really, really odd. And yet they'll turn around and they'll have some games where they look pretty good. Their defense was great against the Bengals, for instance, there.
Yeah.
Offense hasn't looked good in a while. That's the one problem. There's just so little imagination, so little playmaking on that offense there that, I mean, yeah, I'm having a hard time handicapping this game. I'm probably on the Ravens, but I don't trust the Ravens either. But yeah, and leading all this talk here, Nick, is bad for my karma, bad for my soul, though, because it makes me want to believe in the Bengals still having a chance this year. It's going to get rudely squashed out by Buffalo this week, I think. But at the same time, they're hanging around, and the Bengals schedule does ease up after. Well, it doesn't ease up. They play Baltimore again next week, but that could be a winnable game. And it's a direct win too. That's the other big thing about that there. They get Arizona. They have a Miami game in there. They have a Cleveland game in there after that too. So it's just teasing me, and just the Jets giveaway game makes it feels all that much worse. But let's talk Bills here real quick, because neither team is right here either. There's that's a growing theme of this season. There's not many teams that feel pretty good about themselves right now.
Not at all. I think there's like 3 total, maybe 4 who feel good about where they're sitting right now. Maybe the Jets. I don't know. Jets got some optimism, but we'll throw them in there too. One, I think for the Bengals, you want to be playing Baltimore. It's not an easy game, but like that's your best chance to climb back into this thing.
Exactly.
Almost certainly we'll have to win against Buffalo this week. It's a lot more possible now than I would have said it would be a month ago. Buffalo played a terrible first half against Pittsburgh. A couple turnovers, of course, but this is now, I think, 4 straight games where the Bills have had multiple turnovers, and they've had 3 in 3 of those games. So that's kind of becoming just a weekly occurrence for them. Maybe against the Cincinnati defense, you're not as concerned. But I think this is still a little bit of a dicey spot for the Bills. They are at home. My question to you, Jeff, as somebody who watches the Bengals week to week, is like, is this defense actually getting a little bit better over the last couple of weeks? Or is this kind of a little bit smoke and mirrors? The Ravens were not, the right opponent to give us an accurate reading. And maybe this is just like a smash spot where Buffalo, runs all over Cincinnati.
I think they're just merely bad now. They've gotten incrementally better. They're not worst DVOA of all time bad over these last 3 games. It started in the second Pittsburgh game where they just couldn't get off the field. Darnell Washington big brothered them on a couple of plays. They still have that aspect, but they're not giving. In the last couple of games, they haven't given up like the 80-yard touchdowns, I guess. It's a way to look at it there. Some of the young guys are starting to be a little better, I think. I think they've changed some schemes. They're trying to get more pressure on the passer. This doesn't set up well, though, against the Bills. That's the thing I fear is this is a horrible matchup against Josh Allen. It's a horrible matchup against James Cook. I think Cook goes off in this game. We'll see if Kincaid comes back for this one. If Kincaid comes back from this one, I like him as well. I'll play all of his props. If not, I have less confidence in Dawson Knox being able to exploit this. I thought I expected more out of Mark Andrews last week. I know Likely went off, and he should have scored if he protects the ball just a little bit better. And by the way, either one of those 2 plays happened, and we might have a whole different dialogue about Baltimore.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. That's the problem for them. But I think Buffalo mostly avoids that. I think Chase Brown is still a good investment against the Bills. I know that the Pittsburgh backs didn't do much, but this was a weird game flow wise too, where they just weren't running that many plays. I think the Bengals offense will at least be competent against the Bills. Chase Brown is on a roll. It's like 6 straight games of over 100 rushing plus receiving yards. In BetMGM right now, it's 76.5 is his prop. I'm all over on that one there. You can't set it much higher because the risk of injury and game flow and all that. I get that, but I feel pretty good about his chances against Buffalo. But I think Buffalo probably rolls, and we're probably no longer having any hope, and we can go, we can move on in our lives. But until then, I'm going to have a little bit of hope.
Okay, that was a lot to take in. So we feel good about the Bengals offense, but they're still going to get smoked. But Chase Brown still goes off. I think I kind of agree with that. This should be a high scoring game. It's one of the highest totals of the week. I think second behind Cowboys Lions. I mean, there's certainly just a different vibe with Joe Burrow out there. Even if Joe Flacco still provided a pretty nice passing game, like you just feel like you have to account for that more. I think if you're Buffalo, which does open things up in the run game. Fantasy wise, one thing to keep an eye on here is just the status of T. Higgins. Probably won't know until later in the week.
Yeah,
going to be out there, and it's really hard for me to see Cincinnati winning this game without him. If he's back, I think this could become one of those just crazy shootout games that we've seen so many times from Cincy.
Indeed. So we covered the main games and a couple less main games for this upcoming slate. We're doing kind of a look ahead, look back at the same time sort of thing here. So I know you got your notebook full of other notes here to share. I'm going to jump into a few of those here. Let's talk about that Jets Atlanta game, just because it's the A.D. Mitchell game is the thing I wanted to bring out there. Can we bank on this going forward? Jets, they get Miami this week.
Yeah.
Is A.D. Mitchell, where should he rank in my value meter this week?
I think A.D. Mitchell is a semi-reasonable wide receiver 3. You got 4 teams on bye this week. You got injuries, so it's not that crazy to think you have to throw him out there. Mitchell versus John Mechie, I think it's still somewhat of a debate. Mechie outsnapped him. He was still targeted 8 times last week. It just ended up being A.D. Mitchell who was on the receiving end of a long touchdown where the Falcons defensive back just fell down, just tripped and fell. He made it a wide open touchdown for Mitchell, but this is now, kind of 3 straight weeks where both of those guys have been heavily involved. So kind of take your pick there. I don't have a whole lot else from this game. The Falcons probably should have won. This was yet another, what are the Falcons doing type of game. They outgained the Jets 389 to 269. They were at almost 6 yards per play. They were 3 for 3 in the red zone, and special teams, I thought, really ended up killing Atlanta here. They had a muff punt that set up the Jets at the 2-yard line for a touchdown. They gave up an 83-yard kickoff return to give the Jets a free field goal. Less than a minute left in this game. They gave up a long enough punt return to put the Jets basically on the fringes of field goal range. It was a terrible punt, a 40-yard punt when you absolutely need to pin your opponent. Their punter was horrible all day. But Atlanta had opportunities to win this game. And they had 2 drives at the very end where they were getting stops. And it's like, all right, let's just go get a field goal. 2 3-and-outs. They gained 1 total yard.
Yep. They came up small at the wrong moment in time. Kyle Pitts got a bunch of targets early in this game. Bijan was great. Although he had 1 carry to the 1, and then Algier comes in and gets the touchdown. Could have been an epic fantasy day. Instead, it was just a great one. Mechie had a bad drop in that game, 3rd and 4 in the red zone. Just they kicked the field goal instead. Just a killer drop there, and that may have led to the ascendance of A.D. Mitchell later on.
Yeah, my last note on this game is it did begin with 8 consecutive punts from both teams, which is just exactly what you'd expect from Falcons Jets.
Yeah. We've talked so little about the Niners and the Browns. Niners on bye this week. The Browns are the Browns. They did have a Harold Fannin tush push fail, though he's actually lined up in similar situations. He was less out of place than some of these other tight ends. He also had a beautiful touchdown, the 1 touchdown that they had. Once the Niners got ahead in this game, though, this game was over. There wasn't much else to say about that.
Yeah, Browns can't really play from behind at all. They were actually pretty good on early downs. They were terrible on 3rd and 4th down. San Francisco was not great on early downs and awesome on 3rd downs. 11 of 17 on 3rd down against the Browns defense. That usually just does not happen. Browns had more yards. They had more yards per play, but they were 3 of 15 on 3rd and 4th down. Got stuffed on a 4th and 1 at the San Francisco 20-yard line early in the game. They got stuffed, deep in their own territory. That pretty much ended the game, just handed points right there to San Francisco. Not a whole lot to say here other than Ricky Pearsall is just kind of dead right now for fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Cleveland faces Tennessee this week. The total is 33.5. They're projecting it basically an 18-16 game, 18-15 game basically there. Cleveland is favored by 4.5 points somehow, which that's tough. I'm going to probably be on Tennessee in our picks, and I'm not going to be happy about it there. I did promise all the New Orleans and Miami takes that you can get. Let's combine those. Miami plays the Jets. New Orleans faces Tampa Bay. We haven't talked Tampa Bay or Arizona a whole lot there. So let's start on the Tampa Bay side of things, because I think that's pretty fantasy relevant. What's your level of confidence in Bucky Irving going forward?
I thought Bucky Irving looked really good. He saw a slightly higher workload than I expected. I thought we might see more Sean Tucker, but I thought Irving looked like himself right away, which was kind of the number one thing I was looking out for. Could have had a slightly bigger day. He did cash in a touchdown later in the game, but had, a longer touchdown called back earlier. Baker probably should have had a bigger day as well. He had a brutal drop by Chris Godwin on probably his best throw of the day in the end zone on a 3rd down. They had to settle for a field goal. There was another touchdown on a screen pass to Rachaad White that ended up being called back on a penalty. And I believe that was the one that Irving ended up running in. There were some bad drops early in the game. So Baker, to me, that was a huge question coming in with the shoulder injury. I thought he played really well. Wouldn't have really known he was dealing with it. Tristan Wirfs had a receiving touchdown. He basically had the same fantasy output as Emeka Egbuka, who has now been basically non-starting caliber in fantasy for 6 of the last 7 weeks.
Yeah, it's been really a tough look. Egbuka had a bad drop early in that game, and it makes me wonder if he's losing a little bit of confidence in Egbuka, maybe a rookie wall sort of thing, dealing with the top cover corners. Godwin having that impact in the game, I think that's the best thing that could happen to Egbuka in a way, because it takes a little bit of the coverage that those duties off of him a little bit there. Meanwhile, Arizona looks like we might not have Marvin Harrison Jr. due to a heel injury this week. Brissett was good at times, horrible at times. Just this game on both sides of it was just like the missed opportunity game. Tampa had that sequence there where they had 2 touchdowns overturned, and that led to the worst touchdown. They had another sequence where they didn't score, where they really should have. Same with Arizona. Just there's a lot left on the field there. Brissett got to 300 passing yards, almost all of it in the 4th quarter.
Yeah, 99th percentile success rate on offense for Arizona. They just could not really cash in on a lot of those drives. 4th straight game with 40-plus attempts for Jacoby Brissett. We saw Michael Carter and Bam Knight share snaps pretty much evenly. A little bit more work for Knight on those snaps. He had 11 carries to 5 for Carter. Knight also had, a receiving touchdown. But we might get Amari DiMercado back this week. Trey Benson, could come off of IR. So we're in scramble mode right now. I mean, there could be like legit 4 viable running backs for the Arizona Cardinals this week in what is a very tough matchup against the Rams.
4 or 0. Yeah, it might, as the case may be. Speak of the Rams. Oh my God. I guess this just shows that any team can lose to anyone.
Yeah.
Carolina, though, is, I mean, they're 7-6. They're somehow 7-6, despite having some of the worst games of the year. I think of that New England game. I think of the Buffalo game earlier this year. And yet, here they are. Bryce Young dropping dimes on fourth down, and not, the Rams not being able to get that defense off the field late in the game.
They have 2 or 3 of the worst losses of the season. They now have 2 or 3 of the best wins of the season. I mean, they beat Green Bay, Dallas, and the Rams. I mean, those are like 3 of the 5 best teams, it feels like, right now in the NFL. This one was shocking to me. It was just as shocking as the Green Bay win, but maybe even more so because I like Green Bay in that game just played horrible, right? Like they had turnovers early on, like everything was just convoluted the entire way. Whereas the Rams played their best yards per play game of the season offensively and still lost. The pick six was huge. The interception in the end zone, you need plays like that if you're going to pull an upset like this. But the Rams did not hand them this game by any means in the way that I felt like the Packers handed it to Carolina. I mean, the Rams only had 3 possessions in the second half because Carolina was just able to burn clock. They were able to run the ball. They had back-to-back 6 and 8.5 minute drives to begin the second half. They went 7 of 15 on third down, 3 of 3 on fourth downs. All 3 of their offensive touchdowns came on either third and long or fourth down.
Yeah. You're right. There's just ill-timed turnovers. And a couple of those were, I mean, like the pick six wasn't like this, terrible throw. It was more like, hey, guy made a great break on the ball. It was a little behind. It wasn't like one of those, what are you doing, Matthew throws. It's just a good play by Carolina, I thought. Same with the sack fumble at the end, which really sealed the game. I mean, it really turned the game. But for that play, Rams still probably win this game. They were moving the ball.
Yeah.
Puka had an incredible catch earlier on. They had 4 touchdown drives. I mean, this wasn't a total like soil the bed sort of game for the Rams. It was just all 3 of their losses, by the way, are kind of like that too. The loss against the Niners, same thing. The defense didn't show up in that game, and that might be their weak point, is the defensive side.
Yeah, they got burned a couple of times on some deep balls. That was just a little bit uncharacteristic. I thought those corners have actually played pretty well this year, and just kind of, I think, got a little bit greedy going up against Bryce Young, who didn't play that great, but made like the 4 or 5 throws he absolutely had to. Yeah. I think we're on the same page here as far as like this is a quality win for Carolina. This wasn't the Rams just handing over a game.
Yeah. By the way, if Minnesota gets Bryce Young level of play this year, we're not having this conversation about the Vikings. Probably a completely different situation there. Anything else you want to empty from your notebook there?
No, not too much. I mean, we've touched on just about everything. We should mention, Kamani Vidal was awesome in that Chargers-Raiders game, and it sounds like Omarion Hampton is going to be back this week. So just keep an eye out on what that workload split is. I think Vidal was good enough that he has to be a part of this backfield. Maybe it's closer even to 50-50 in Hampton's first game back, but you're also playing Monday night against the Eagles, and I think we'll see a better effort out of that defense. So that's just something to monitor this week. Not a whole lot else to say about, Vikings, Seahawks. We kind of covered that. Falcons, Jets, Saints, Dolphins. Saints are still the Saints, man. First half, they went 3 and out, 2 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, sack fumble, 3 and out, interception in the red zone. Were their first half possessions. They're just a completely sad operation, pretty much incapable of scoring more than 20 points. And I had higher hopes for Devin Neal, who saw the workload, but even against Miami, which is not a good defense, like there's the blocking is not there. The scheming is not there for New Orleans. So I was left wanting a bit with Devin Neal, who did have 1 red zone carry and didn't turn it into anything.
Yeah. Second, he picked it up a little bit in the second half when they started moving the ball. You'd get like 4 or 5 yards a carry. Never a huge run there. No. Devon Bailey is the one guy that did open my eyes for the Saints a little bit there. In addition to the touchdown, which it was a good amount of footwork, he had another sideline toe tapper that was really good. He might be something. Just will he ever realize it on a game-to-game basis? That's the real problem. That it's hard to trust in that. That's going to wrap up today's RotoWire Reactions Look Ahead podcast there. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our 3 sponsors. Thanks to Dabble. Thanks to Trophy Smack. And, of course, to our new sponsor as well, Prosper Trading. Thank you to you guys for listening to the podcast, chatting in the forum if you're streaming live with us. Good luck in week 14. Take care.